You grew up in a world obsessed with a slogan that sounds self-evident. Life is about being happy. Every choice, every dream, every plan is measured by a single question. Will this make me feel better? Yet the more you chase comfort, the more you feel your spirit quietly rotting. The happiness society sells you is like a light bulb dangling just ahead. You think you are about to reach it, but with every step forward, it drifts farther away. Nietzsche looks straight at that illusion and delivers a merciless cut. The goal of life is not happiness, it is power. Not power to rule the world, but power to rule yourself. Power that lets you look back at each year and see yourself sharper, deeper, more formidable. And if you continue worshipping happiness, you will become exactly the kind of person herd morality desires: obedient, pleasant, harmless. This is not a gentle talk. This is a Nietzschean provocation. Do not seek happiness, seek strength. As long as you pursue happiness, you live beneath your own standard. But when you pursue strength, every pain and every failure becomes fuel for the will to power you have neglected for far too long. You can stop here and keep living as you always have. But if you stay, you may no longer look at life and at your suffering the same way again. Number 1. Happiness is a subtle trap. Why Nietzsche saw it as a sign of decay. There is a lie repeated so often that it hardens into truth, that the highest goal of human life is happiness. You are taught to be okay, to be comfortable, to be balanced, to avoid all tension and conflict. And if one day you are not happy, society immediately tells you that something is wrong with you. But Nietzsche stares directly at that promise and calls it by its real name. A refined anesthetic for souls that have forgotten why they exist. For centuries, religion and traditional morality have turned happiness into an instrument of control. It does not make human beings stronger, it makes them more obedient. It teaches that striving upward is arrogance, that endurance is virtue, that submission today will be rewarded in another world. Happiness within that value system is not the result of strength, but the prize for obedience. For Nietzsche, such happiness liberates no one. It softens people, tames them, and makes them easy to lead. And that is precisely where decay begins. According to Nietzsche, the happiness society promotes is not the peak of life, it is a stopping point. It is surrender coated in sugar. It is the state of enough that makes you shrink without noticing. When you live to avoid pain and chase comfort, you trade away the one thing that allows human beings to rise: inner strength. You do not die, but you live beneath your own capacity, day by day, hour by hour. Look around you. How many people say they are satisfied, yet their eyes are empty, their voices tired, and each day is only a fading copy of the one before? No tragedy, but no life either. Just a low, smoldering flame turned down to the minimum, enough not to go out, never enough to flare up. Nietzsche would ask the question everyone finds uncomfortable. If your life continued exactly like this, no better, no worse, would you accept living another 40 years? If the answer is not sure, then what you call happiness is merely numbness dressed in moral language. Consider a familiar example. Someone works a job they do not hate, earns enough to get by, has a stable environment, and buys small pleasures on the weekend to unwind. From the outside, it looks like a normal life, but inside, there is always a whisper. I am postponing something. They once wanted to learn more, to challenge themselves more, to become the person they knew they could be. But each time that impulse surfaced, They strangled it with the mantra, "As long as I'm happy, it's fine." Nietzsche called that moment a betrayal of the life instinct, the moment you trade potential for cheap calm and consent to live beneath your true nature. Happiness is like standing at the foot of a mountain. No one climbs a mountain because it is comfortable. Climbing is painful, exhausting, dangerous. But only in the climb do you learn whether your spine is strong or weak, how wide your limits really are. If comfort is your goal, you will die at the base of the mountain, in the safe zone anyone can inhabit. But if you want a view beyond the height of the crowd, you must accept steep slopes, falling rocks, and wounds. Power, for Nietzsche, is precisely the capacity to pass through those slopes without needing consolation or reassurance. Nietzsche wrote with brutal clarity, "What is good? All that heightens the feeling of power, the will to power, power itself in man." Measured by that sentence, you will see that much of what you call happiness is merely comfort slowly hollowing you out, helping you forget dissatisfaction without helping you overcome it, making you content without making you stronger. The value of a life, for Nietzsche, was never counted in happy days. It lies in how many times you dared to step into instability in order to become a larger version of yourself. The path of power does not promise comfort, because comfort was never the privilege of those who refused to live a mediocre life. Nietzsche offers only one cold but liberating promise. If you dare to walk that path, you will no longer despise yourself. And for Nietzsche, that is the only condition under which any later joy does not turn into a lie. Number 2, the will to power, the true engine of all life. And from the very emptiness that happiness leaves behind, the quiet sense that human life has lost the tension it inherently demands, Nietzsche leads you into a deeper layer, where he reveals the primordial force operating behind every choice and every movement you make. Nietzsche called it the will to power, and from the moment this concept appears, countless people misunderstand it. They hear power and think of domination, coercion, crushing others. But Nietzsche is not speaking about standing above others. He is speaking about not standing beneath yourself. The will to power is not a desire to control, but an instinct to expand. The impulse that drives life to exceed itself and declare, "I can be more than this." Nietzsche wrote a sentence as cold as a blade. "This world is the will to power, and nothing besides." For him, life does not operate on pleasure or safety. It operates through an inner force that constantly pushes beings beyond their current form. A tree does not grow upward because it likes the light. If it does not grow, it dies in the shade. A muscle does not grow because it enjoys pain. Without resistance, it atrophies. Human beings are no different. When the will to power is not exercised, vitality does not disappear, it fades. The soul is not fine. It quietly decomposes. A viewer named Elena, 37 years old, an HR manager at a large company, once shared her story. A good salary, pleasant colleagues, a stable job. Everyone saw her as a successful woman. Yet for years, Elena carried a heavy, nameless feeling. No acute pain, no drama, just an emptiness, as if life lacked a soul. Everything repeated by inertia, work, home, movies, weekend walks, until a creative writing workshop during a business trip. Just 2 hours with a pen were enough to awaken a part of herself she had abandoned for over a decade. She did not feel happy. She felt lifted. And that feeling terrified her, because it exposed the truth that she had been living inside a structure far too narrow for her nature. That moment was cruel but precise. Eleanor was forced to end the silence of her will to power. And from that point on, her life shifted in a direction that could not be reversed. Nietzsche believed something most people avoid. The greatest suffering does not come from circumstances, but from a living being betraying its own natural direction of growth. When you shrink out of fear of life's impulses, you create suffering. When you accept values that are not yours, you build a mental prison. When the will to power is denied an object toward which it can reach, it does not rest, it consumes you from within. That is why, in Nietzsche's philosophy, liberation never comes from prayer or waiting. It comes from recreation, new values, new aims, actions strong enough to shatter old frames. Imagine the will to power as a river. A river exists to flow. If you block it, it does not vanish. It stagnates, turns murky, and eventually either bursts its banks or dies. When the will to power is blocked, by fear, by borrowed norms, by self-contraction, the energy meant for creation turns inward, becoming restlessness, comparison, irritability, or a vague exhaustion you cannot name. Nietzsche did not see this as a moral failure. He saw it as the natural consequence of a life force denied its proper course. The most important thing Nietzsche wants you to understand is this: the will to power is not a gift for a special few. It is the foundation of all life. The issue is not whether you have it, but whether you direct it outward to build or inward to self-destruct. When you learn, collide, and bear the weight of challenge, the will to power becomes the engine that makes you stronger. When you shrink, minimize yourself, and look for reasons not to step forward, the will to power turns its blade against you. And here, Nietzsche becomes most ruthless. He does not ask whether you are moral or happy. He asks whether this life increases the feeling of strength within you. Are you expanding or contracting? Are you carrying more or inventing reasons to avoid? Are you evolving or merely repeating yourself? And most importantly, is the movement within you directed upward? The will to power does not demand speed. It demands direction. At times you slow down to accumulate. At times you step back to realign. But if the sense of "I am growing" disappears, Nietzsche would say you have drifted away from the axis of your own life. Nietzsche never promised that living by the will to power would make you comfortable. On the contrary, it may make you restless, isolated, different. But what he does promise is this: you will no longer have to look down on yourself. And for Nietzsche, that is the only standard of a life worthy of respect. If these words make you realize that your exhaustion does not come from a lack of pleasure, but from suppressing your own vitality for too long, leave a like on the video as a silent affirmation. I am no longer running from my own strength. Because for Nietzsche, that is the beginning of all real power. The moment a human being stops chasing comfort and starts listening to the deepest urge within, the call demanding that they rise and overcome themselves. Number 3. Suffering is not the enemy, it is the furnace of strength. And once the will to power appears as the silent engine driving all movement in life, Nietzsche leads you into a harsher truth. No strength ever rises while a person continues to avoid suffering. He does not write this as moral advice, but as a cold diagnosis of how the soul hardens. Nietzsche's phrase, "What does not kill me makes me stronger," is not an empty slogan. It is a biological, psychological, and existential truth. Suffering is not an event to be avoided, but the furnace in which the individual is reforged into a stronger shape. What separates Nietzsche from soothing philosophers is that he never treated pain as an enemy. For him, suffering is the only true test that reveals who lives by the will to power and who lives for momentary comfort. In the Bible, there is the story of Jacob wrestling with an angel through the night. Jacob does not flee, does not ask for mercy, does not let go. He fights until his hip is dislocated, yet the angel does not punish him, but blesses him, renaming him Israel, the one who has wrestled with God and men and prevailed. This story is not about miracles. It describes the mechanism Nietzsche constantly pointed to. A human being is reborn only by entering a struggle with their own fate. Strength does not grow from avoidance, but from enduring the force of life without breaking. Modern neuroscience merely confirms what Nietzsche saw over a century ago. The nervous system does not develop in comfort. The process of myelination, forming the myelin sheath that speeds neural transmission, occurs most strongly when a person faces challenges that are just beyond capacity. The body grows through directed stress. Those who avoid conflict, fear pressure, and cling to comfort believe they are protecting themselves, but in truth, they weaken their nervous system. Nietzsche needed no laboratory to grasp this. Every strong soul has passed through a dark corridor with no talisman except inner resilience. If happiness is the flat land where humans fall asleep, then suffering is the steep terrain where the true self appears. Nietzsche did not worship pain, but he also did not kneel before comfort. He knew that all life grows stronger only by resisting the weight placed upon it. Look at any tragic figure in literature. Achilles becomes a symbol of power only when he faces his foretold death. He knows retreat would bring safety, but advance would carry his name into eternity. And Achilles chooses advance. Nietzsche does not glorify tragedy. He honors the truth that greatness appears only when a human being accepts the cost of becoming. Most people, by contrast, learn to shrink before suffering. They call it self-protection, but Nietzsche saw it as the contraction of the soul. When you fear conflict, fear difficulty, fear risk, you do not merely avoid pain. You miss the chance to become a stronger version of yourself. You turn your back on the furnace that forged the people you admire. And for Nietzsche, that is the fastest path to being ground down into mediocrity by life. Look honestly at your own life. The moments that made you grow never came from peaceful days. What hardened you was not happiness, but moments when everything seemed to collapse. Like the time you were rejected from the job you had pinned all your hopes on, staring numbly at the screen, your throat tight, yet the next morning you still sent out 10 more applications. Like the period when you did not know if you could pay rent, your heart racing every night with fear, yet you kept working, learning, searching. Like the moment you were forced to face your greatest fear, a breakup, a failure, an exposed truth that left you naked, and though you wanted to disappear, you did not run. Nietzsche wants you to remember this. You grew stronger not because you were happy, but because you refused to flee. That is why suffering is not a calamity, but a gate. Without this gate, you cannot step from the person society shaped into the person the will to power is calling forth. You do not find strength by praying for life to become lighter. You find it by entering the darkness, your mind wants to avoid. And if you endure that path, Nietzsche believes you will emerge not merely different, but dangerous in the most beautiful sense, no longer led by fear. In Nietzsche's philosophy, suffering was never the enemy. It is the exam life uses to sort those who only want comfort and those who truly want to grow. And if you choose the path of power over happiness, you will grasp a simple but ruthless truth. Suffering does not come to destroy you. It comes to ask whether you deserve the strength you are demanding. Number 4. Herd morality and the plot against the strong. At this point, you must face a difficult truth. If real strength is forged in suffering, why do people still choose to live small, choose comfort, choose contraction? Nietzsche leads you into the dark core of social life, where not pain, but the crowd itself becomes the greatest obstacle to becoming. Society does not want you strong, not because it hates you, but because a sufficiently strong individual can shake the fragile structures the majority relies on to feel safe. Nietzsche called this herd morality, a value system created not to elevate human beings, but to bind them, predictable, manageable, submissive. Herd morality glorifies pleasant traits, humility, obedience, lack of ambition, not because they are noble, but because they make you harmless. Nietzsche cuts through this illusion with a cold strike. Morality is the herd instinct in the individual. In other words, much of what you are taught is right is simply the herd's defensive reflex. What makes herd morality truly dangerous is that it controls you not through force, but through consent. You are raised with the fear of being excluded, so you voluntarily amputate your strongest instincts to be accepted. The herd does not need to strike you. It only needs you to believe that shrinking is wisdom. You do not have to look far to see this. Let me tell you about a man I once met at a professional talk, Marcus, a software engineer. For years, he was praised as nice, easy to work with, humble, non-competitive. Colleagues liked him, but precisely for that reason, Marcus was never considered for leadership. The one time he expressed a firm opinion in a meeting, without insulting anyone, simply speaking directly, someone immediately remarked, "Why so intense today?" Within weeks, he became the subject of office whispers. Marcus has changed. Is something wrong with him? He's not as gentle as before. All because he dared to show the true shape of his strength. The crowd reacted like an immune system detecting a foreign body. In that moment, Marcus grasped a cold truth. Society does not punish what is wrong. It punishes what exceeds the norm. In a flock of sheep, anyone that runs faster or bleats louder is pushed back toward the center. Not because it is hated, but because uniformity makes the group feel safe. Humans are often no different. Anyone who dares to live larger, want more, step off the common path, is quickly labeled selfish, arrogant, dangerous, too ambitious. Not because they are truly dangerous, but because their existence exposes the inner shrinkage of the majority. The crowd praises humility, but resents confidence. It applauds you for being reasonable, yet grows uncomfortable when you set boundaries. It glorifies kindness, but is quick to call you selfish the moment you pursue what you truly want. Nietzsche saw this contradiction and laughed. People are not afraid of what is bad in you. They are afraid of what is strong, because strength forces them to confront the smallness they hide beneath moral language. That is why Nietzsche did not teach people to be better. He taught them to be stronger. Because real strength always stands in opposition to the morality the majority constructs. Most frightening of all, the crowd always believes it is right. It believes lack of ambition is virtue, that sameness is safety, that pleasing everyone is goodness. But Nietzsche gave all of this a single name: the decay of the will to live. That is why he saw the pursuit of power, in the sense of rising, expanding, becoming, as the only way to live as a human being in the full sense of the word. Not to stand above others, but to stop standing beneath yourself. Not to destroy the herd, but to avoid being crushed by it. And when you begin to hear the whisper of the crowd, when people who once felt comfortable around you start to look at you with caution, when you no longer fit the old mold, that is the sign. You are breaking free from herd morality, moving closer to the shape life is calling you to become. If this section makes you realize that the compliments gentle, nice, well-behaved you once treasured were in fact velvet-lined chains of the herd, write down, even if only one sentence, the moment you were punished for daring to grow stronger, for daring to speak truth, for daring to set boundaries. Not to tell me, but to declare to yourself that you have seen the herd's scheme clearly. They do not want you good. They want you harmless. Number 5. From victim to agent. Power begins when you stop blaming. But the moment you break free from herd morality, Nietzsche forces you to face a deeper layer of pain. No strength can ever rise in a person who still sees themselves as a victim of life. You may climb through pain, you may rise above the crowd, but if deep down you still believe that life owes you, that the past has ruined you, that circumstances are unfair, that others must change so you can be at peace, then the will to power is strangled at the very starting line. Nietzsche once wrote, "A man is most dishonored when he allows himself to be made a victim." For him, the victim mentality is not merely weakness. It is a self-inflicted humiliation of one's very being. When a person believes the world must change so they suffer less, must be gentler so they are less wounded, must be fairer so they hurt less, they hand over all inner power to forces beyond their control. They are no longer the agent of their own life. They become merely a product of circumstance. In Nietzsche's eyes, this is a form of spiritual suicide. The more one blames, the more one contracts, the more one resents, the more powerless one becomes in the face of one's own life. A story that Nietzsche, if alive, would likely nod in approval at is that of Oprah Winfrey, the most powerful media icon in the world, America's first self-made female billionaire, a woman who built an empire from nothing. Born into poverty, abused, mocked for her appearance, discriminated against for her skin color, Oprah had every reason to live as a victim. Yet she once said, "The moment I decided to take responsibility for my life, everything changed." And exactly as Nietzsche described, the moment a person renounces the right to resentment, power begins to rise from the deepest place, the place where they realize no one is coming to save them. And that realization itself is the beginning of freedom. Oprah did not succeed because of luck. She became an icon because she refused to let pain define her being. And society is forced to bend around people like that. Nietzsche understood this mechanism clearly, which is why he opposed every value system that encourages people to see themselves as victims. Victims cannot grow strong. Victims cannot live by the will to power because they have already handed that quality over to the external world. Nietzsche did not deny suffering or injustice. but he rejected using them as excuses for failing to live up to one's own potential. Nietzsche did not write for those seeking consolation. He wrote for those willing to hear a bitter truth. Strength does not come from resentment, but from decisively declaring, "Even if it is not my fault, everything that happens is my responsibility." Not to punish oneself, but to empower oneself. Because power is born from the capacity to act, and responsibility is the only door that leads to real action. You cannot seek power if you cling to a victim identity because the victim wants to be saved, while the agent wants to stand up alone. The victim wants the world to change, while the agent changes themselves. The victim wants sympathy, while the agent wants to be tested. In Nietzsche's philosophy, these are not merely two attitudes toward life. They are two entirely opposite modes of being. And when you look back on your life and realize how many times you postponed becoming who you could be simply because you were busy blaming, Nietzsche wants you to ask a question as cold as a blade. Does this make me stronger, or does it make me weaker? The answer tells you exactly which side of life you are on, the side of decaying comfort, or the side of strength growing in silence. Once you are brave enough to step from the position of victim into the position of agent, you will see what Nietzsche always regarded as the ultimate truth. Power begins at the exact moment you stop demanding that the world change and start changing yourself. Number 6. Strength demands solitude, the unavoidable price. Perhaps the hardest truth to swallow in Nietzsche's entire philosophy lies here. The path to power is never crowded. It is not warm, not gentle. There is no applause. And it certainly does not belong to those who crave to be understood, accepted, accompanied. Nietzsche once wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly. A growing soul always becomes too much in the eyes of those who choose to stay on the ground." That very imbalance creates the price anyone who seeks strength must pay: solitude. Not the solitude of the defeated left behind, but the solitude of one who is stepping out of the common orbit. You cannot rise while expecting the crowd to understand you. You cannot expand while insisting others believe you are still the same. When you grow, you change. And when you change, the majority reacts as if you have committed a fault. They do not want you to grow stronger, because your strength exposes their stagnation. They do not want you to change, because your change forces them to confront how long they have remained still. Thus, alienation and misunderstanding are not accidents. They are defensive reflexes of the crowd towards someone who is leaving them behind. A friend of mine once said that only after turning 30 did she realize she had never lived for herself. Every choice revolved around the question, what will others think? When she began setting boundaries, saying no, prioritizing her own being, the very people who once praised her immediately whispered, "Too difficult, not as sweet anymore, overly ambitious." She lost many relationships simply for the first time living truthfully. But what astonished her was this: the loss did not weaken her. On the contrary, in that empty space, she felt inner strength rise, a strength long suppressed to fit those around her. Nietzsche understood this mechanism well. He knew that strength is not born in the noise of the crowd. The will to power needs silence. It needs space. It needs separation from the countless voices urging you to live smaller. That is why he saw solitude not as social failure, but as an inevitable equation for those who are becoming. The most accurate metaphor is not the warrior, but the seed beneath the soil, unseen. Yet in darkness and silence it is accumulating power, breaking through the hardest shell, the shell of itself. Only when that solitude has done its work does the seed gain enough force to break through the ground. But the solitude Nietzsche speaks of is not meaningless sadness. It is the result of no longer living by compromise, no longer bending to be loved, no longer shrinking to be praised as nice. When you stop compromising, you lose the relationships built on that shrinking. What remains is space, and in that space, you finally hear the voice you silenced for too long, the will to power. If you still fear solitude, you will live forever in a cramped room built from others' expectations. But if you are brave enough to cross this fear, you will touch what the crowd never has: absolute self-mastery. Perhaps the most ruthless thing Nietzsche says about solitude is this: solitude is not the price of strength, it is the proof of strength. The weak never dare to stand alone. The weak choose noise to avoid facing themselves. The weak choose the crowd because the crowd conceals inner impotence. Only those who are growing dare to enter silence, because silence exposes the truth. They have gone so far that no one can walk with them anymore. And if you are brave enough to face that solitude directly, you will understand what Nietzsche meant from the beginning. Happiness never requires you to stand alone, but strength does. Happiness makes you belong to the crowd. Strength forces you beyond it. Happiness makes you comfortable. Strength makes you unyielding. So if you are beginning to feel more alone, less understood, less patted on the back, less belonging, do not be afraid. That is not a sign you are lost. It is a sign you are walking the path Nietzsche wanted you to walk. The path of one who chooses strength over comfort. The path of one who dares to become themselves, even at the cost of solitude. And if this section makes you realize that the solitude you are passing through is not failure, but proof that you are leaving the herd to enter an orbit uniquely your own, leave a single word in the comments: ascend. Not to impress, not to be agreed with, but as a silent affirmation that you understand what Nietzsche meant. That silence is where the true self is forged, and no one can walk with you on the stretch of road you were born to walk alone. Number 7. Self-created values, when there is no longer a single right for all. If you have stepped away from the patterns of the crowd, you must now face a truth no one prepares you for. Life no longer offers ready-made answers. Nietzsche did not see this moment as instability, but as the point where the old ego cracks to make way for a new one. From here, the greatest danger is not being misunderstood, but standing naked before the question: if there is no common value to rely on, what will I rely on? Either you forge your own being, or you will be pulled back into the old spiral, where people live by habit rather than by nature. Nietzsche once wrote, "Become who you are." It sounds like inspiration, but in truth, it is a strike against every layer society has wrapped around you. To become who you are means to destroy values you never chose for yourself. It forces you to face the fact that many qualities society praises in you, nice, agreeable, gentle, are sometimes just masks that make others comfortable. And Nietzsche wants you to ask, are the things I am praised for truly mine? Most people choose happiness because happiness allows them to live by inertia, but power, for Nietzsche, is the process that prevents you from returning to who you were yesterday. It does not ask you to repeat what is familiar. It demands that you create what has never existed. It forces you to leave the taught notion of right and make room for another kind of right. Right for your nature, not right for the crowd. This is the first separation between those who live authentically and those who live to be approved. Lydia is proof of this. 38 years old, 2 children, always praised as kind. Yet for 10 years, she lived as if borrowing her own life, fulfilling roles, meeting expectations. Only when she reread old journal pages did she see the abandoned part of herself. The dream of a photography studio. That contact did not bring happiness, it brought awakening. For the first time, she saw the gap between who she wanted to become and who society rewarded. And when she entered a photography class, she did not find support. She found the ferocity of a nature demanding to live again. That moment was enough to collapse an entire, proper life. Imagine standing in a primeval forest with no signposts, no footprints before you. Each step you cut through the undergrowth, not to imitate anyone, but to reveal a direction that has never existed. Those who live by inherited values walk paved roads, smooth, even, but belonging to others. Those who create their own values do not walk to reach safety. They walk to discover their nature in the face of the unknown. Nietzsche does not care which direction you choose. He cares only whether you choose it yourself. That is why he opposed all unified moral systems. For Nietzsche, common morality does not make people better, it makes them more alike. The moment you use social templates to judge yourself, you shrink to fit them. But personal values are not found by shrinking. They are found by rebelling against what once kept you safe. When you set your own standard of living, a standard grounded not in consensus but in inner strength, you leave the level of those seeking acceptance. You step into the level of those reconstructing their own being. And here Nietzsche turns the blade sharpest. The seeker of happiness wants to adjust the world to be easier to live in. The seeker of power wants to adjust themselves to be worthy of life. The seeker of happiness needs a road. The seeker of power needs a direction. The seeker of happiness wants companionship. The seeker of power accepts solitude as part of the creative process of becoming. The difference lies in the motive of existence. If you are at a stage where no social value fits you anymore, do not mistake it for being lost. It is a sign you are about to enter what Nietzsche called the self-construction of the soul, where you no longer ask, how do others live? But in what form do I want to exist? From here on, happiness is no longer the goal. It is merely a byproduct of a life built on strength. For as Nietzsche implies, those who live by their nature do not chase joy. Joy comes to them as a reward for honesty with themselves. If you have come this far, you have touched the ruthless truth Nietzsche wanted humanity to face. Happiness is not salvation, and certainly not the goal. Happiness is a small reward for the weak. Power is the door that opens for those who dare to become. You have seen illusions stripped away, pain revealed as a furnace, heard morality exposed as a gilded cage, your own will to power demanding the place stolen from it long ago. And most importantly, you have seen what Nietzsche always emphasized. No one lives for you, and no one gives you strength. You must take it. Because life, as Nietzsche wrote, does not belong to those who seek what is comfortable. It belongs to those who dare to climb with trembling legs, dare to endure solitude to preserve their being, dare to break molds to create values of their own. The seeker of happiness looks for smooth paths. The seeker of power creates paths no one has dared to walk. And only one of these paths leads to a life worthy of respect. If this message resonates with you, share it with someone who is living beneath their true capacity. And if you want to go deeper into the art of becoming dangerous in the most beautiful sense, self-mastery, will, inner strength, press subscribe. Because Nietzsche was right. You were not born to be happy. You were born to become stronger.